that does it.
We can do a parking spot.
I just don't think I think it's required.
I've left it crumpled. Dale, I've left it crumpled in the front seat of my car to remind me to swing by Moore's.
Yeah. We're down numbers today.
It's the shirt of shame.
So then,
Could have been worse. Could have been just before the cameras turned on. There's a few that are going to actually miss. For sleeping? That's it. Hey. Yeah. Of course. Finance it on.
That's what I don't know how we cope with my kids.
Lower level is what you want to start drinking coffee.
no, I'm just trying to stand.
I'm thinking about
You'll feel better. That's true.
10 years now.
Ready to roll? Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Finance and Audit Committee meeting. I'd like to recognize that first we're on the traditional territory, the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Snellgrove. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, they can write it down on the question sheet. It's right over here behind me, and I will call you up and please write the questions to the agenda items only. Introduction of late items.
Thank you. Agenda item 16, funding request for Mid-Island Business Initiative. Add delegation Bob Moss, managing broker in the I-Commercial.
Very good. Can I have a motion for approval of the agenda as amended? Councillor Bonner, seconded Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. Motion for the adoption of the minutes is circulated. Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. We now have the presentation for the final budget 2019-23 financial plan. Ms. Mercer. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. So we're here this morning to introduce the final 2019 to 2023 financial plan. And the plan has been updated with information received since Council adopted the preliminary budget in January. You may remember that we have to have a financial plan passed before May 15th. So we are getting close to that deadline. So we have wrapped up all budget entries and are here to present what we have to date. And so with the updated information, we have a 5% tax increase, which is 1% for asset management and about 4% for cost additions or increases. And this is marginally lower than the 5.08 that we brought to you in January. And so today in the package you have a report as well as a PowerPoint presentation. And Ms. Fulla is going to go through the PowerPoint presentation and highlight the changes that we've made since January.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Council.
So today I want to walk you through some of the highlights of the changes from the provisional budget that you adopted in January versus the final budget we're bringing for you today. So just a recap of how we got here. Back in November, the directors presented to you their 2019 business plan. We also presented to you our 5-year project plan. As well, we talked about our asset management plan and we reviewed the 20-year investment plan for you. Then in January, you adopted the 2019-2023 financial plan, which we refer to as the provisional budget. Today, we're going to walk you through some of the changes. So we had some changes to estimates, plus we've also had some changes that have been directed by Council. So as Ms. Mercer mentioned, we're looking at a slightly lower property tax increase than we were at provisional. We're now currently sitting at 5%, which is down marginally from the 5.1%. 1% is going to our asset management reserve increase, and the other 4% is covering general property tax increases. And a little later in the presentation, I will walk you through how we got from the 5.1 to 5%. So looking back at the city's history, If we adopt a 5% tax increase for 2019, that will bring our 10-year average to 2.1%. Now, a couple things I'd like to highlight for you is in 2013, we adopted the 1% annual increase for the General Asset Management Reserve, and that's continuing until 2022. And the other change that I'd like to point out is starting in 2016, we now consider the requisition for the Vancouver Island Regional Library as a collection on behalf of other governments. So when you look at the tax increases prior to 2016, they include any increase for the Vancouver Island Regional Library. That is a mouthful. Also, back in December, we showed you how we compared to other municipalities. So this is some comparable sized municipalities as well as some of our nearby neighbors. Now, when we look at other municipalities, it's really important to realize that we don't all provide the same basket of services or provide them in the same way. So examples of this are sewer and water. For sewer and water, we have utilities here. They're paid through from user fees. Some municipalities have user fees. Some fund these services through property taxation. Just like other municipalities have a drainage utility. We currently do not have a drainage utility. How you provide police services. Some municipalities, such as Victoria, have their own municipal police force. We contract with the RCMP, and then also the number of RCMP members you have impacted the cost of that service. The other thing to keep in mind is the ratio between the different property classes. So we have industrial, commercial, residential. So the ratios can be different from community to community. Now, not everybody's a numbers person, so we did provide a graph here just to make it a little more readable for some people. The black line there is the city of Nanaimo. You can see that we're quite comparable to Kamloops and Kelowna, and then the other municipalities either fall above or below the line. So what does 5% mean for the typical household in Nanaimo? It means the property taxes are going up about $101. Back in December, you also passed our use rate bylaws. This had about a $38 impact on the typical household for water, and that's based on 220 gallons a day. For sewer fees, the dollar went up $5. For sanitation, $5. So the typical household will have an impact of about $149 in 2019. So how does that property tax money break down, the $2,092? Well, $1,734 goes to city services. So this is the day-to-day services you receive from the city. This is when you phone 911 and fire and police show up at your house. This is getting your streets plowed. This is getting your parks mowed, your recreational services, and all the cultural and heritage amenities that you enjoy. $175 goes towards reserves. This includes our transfer to the General Asset Management Reserve, the rebuilding of our SNCC reserves, as well as other infrastructure reserves. $138 goes to projects. So you will recall back in December we talked about the 20-year investment plan. That was based on $7 million a year from property taxation going to projects. In 2019, we're just slightly below that $7 million target, and that works out to $138 per house, typical household. And then we also have $45 for debt servicing. So this is our debt on the Port of Nanaimo Centre, the Nanaimo Aquatic Centre, as well as Cranberry Fire Hall, or station number 4. Now, of course, you know we have other debt. We have debt related to the automation of our sanitation system. That's being funded through sanitation user fees. We also have debt for the water treatment plant, which is being funded from water user fees. And then we acquired debt last year for the Fire Station 1 rebuild. And of course, we'll have more debt coming up for that because it's a multi-year project. And that's being funded from the General Asset Management Reserve. We also have new debt in the plan for the waterfront walkway, and that debt would be funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. So when we look at how does that 1734 break down by the different city departments, the largest share goes to police services at $513, and we have a tie for second place between Parks and Recreation and Fire Emergency Management and 911. Just so that everyone understands what goes into some of the other categories, because it might not be quite clear, when we talk about city administration, we're talking about council, legislative services, the CAO's office, as well as the city solicitor's office. Under corporate services, we're talking about human resources, finance, IT, corporate facilities, as well as committed contingency. So what sits in committed contingency is you have the recent contract you've negotiated with QP. So we have budget set aside there, and we also have budget set aside in committed contingency for other potential wage increases. And then when we talk about tourism and downtown revitalization, we're talking about the $150,000 downtown event grant program that we have, as well as the funding for tourism, marketing, and visitors services. Now, if we want to look at the bigger picture, we're projecting revenues in 2019 of $187 million. So this is going to fund those day-to-day services, it's going to fund our projects, it's going to fund our infrastructure reserves, and this also includes the requisition for the funding for the Vancouver Island Regional Library. About 59% of that funding is going to come from property taxation, and approximately 24% comes from user fees. Now, what we don't consider revenue is new borrowing. So we do have borrowing in the 5-year plan for some capital projects. And we also consider transfers from reserves revenue. And as you know, we fund the majority of our projects through transfers from reserves. And there's also a few operating costs that we fund from transfers from reserve. Looking at the expenditure side of things, we have about $145 million budget. And this is excluding projects. This is just day-to-day services that the city provides. So now I'd like to walk you through some of the key changes for 2019 between the provisional budget that you approved in January and the final budget we're proposing today. I'm going to do it in a couple stages. First, we'll look at the changes that impacted property taxation, and then I want to highlight for you some other changes that, while they didn't impact property taxation, they are big changes, so we do want to point them out. So the changes that impacted property taxation, we have about $190,000 for wages and benefits. So when we presented the provisional budget to you, we did mention that we didn't have the new rates for extended health benefits in the plan yet. Those rates are now in there. We did receive a small reduction in our WCB rate, so that helped reduce costs. We have the increase there for council and the CAO, as well as some other level changes for a variety of positions across the city. So it all netted out to $190,000. Then council approved a grant to the SPCA for their SNP program. They approved the grant for 2019 and 2020, so you see the $12,500 there for 2019. We had some changes to projects. So we had one project that we moved out to 2022, and we added 4 projects that are being funded through property taxation. And then we had other changes that were up or down, and they netted out to just under $2,300. So overall, we had an increase in expenditures to be funded from property taxation of just under $226,000. So when we brought you the provisional budget, we always make an estimate for growth. And we like to be conservative in that estimate because we want it to come in higher, not lower. We estimated $1.3 million. The actual growth number came in at $1.56 million. So that is the change there for $265,000. So that means we had a net change of negative $39,000. So our provisional tax rate, we said it was 5.1. That's rounded. It was 5.08. The $40,000 saves us 0.04% on our property taxes, which brings us to the 5.04 or 5% property tax increase we are now sitting at. So we'd also like to highlight some of the other changes, as I said. So we had a few changes for projects that I'd like to point out. For the Harewood Youth Park, this is a 2-phase project. The largest phase is this year in 2019 with a smaller phase in 2022. We have $80,000 in additional private contributions for this project. This allowed us to reduce the funding from the Community Works Reserve for this project, which is great. That means that funding is now available for other projects, which you see we're going to need for the Stroxman outfield lights. We spent it as fast as we saved it. Unfortunately, the Nanaimo Hospitality Association is unable to provide the $50,000 private contribution pledge. It turns out it's an ineligible expense under the MRDT program. So unfortunately, they had to withdraw their contribution. So we have increased the funding for that project from the Community Works Reserve. And that's a 2-phase project. It will occur over 2019 and 2020. And then we had the Chase River Pump Station and Force Main. So this project was originally scheduled to occur in 2018. When the project was originally budgeted, it was under our old DCC bylaw. Last year, Council did approve a new DCC bylaw, and since construction didn't occur last year, we now need to make sure that our funding matches the new DCC bylaw. So the allocation between existing and future residents on this project changed. So we've changed the funding, which resulted in us reducing our internal borrowing and increasing our funding from the General Asset Management Reserve. Now, we also have a number of changes that Council is aware of. These either were reports to Council or information reports at Finance and Audit Committee meetings, but I just want to walk through them to remind you of some of the changes that you have approved to the plan. We have the Bastion Street Parkade. We have our Strand replacement project this year at the Parkade. We increased the funding for this project, and it is funded from the parking reserve. We have the Chase River Pump Station at 4th Main. So this project actually has two components, a sewer component and a water component, and we did increase the budget back in January for both pieces of this project. We have the Community Action Team Grant, which you approved at the last Finance and Audit Committee meeting. We have downtown parking signage. So as you're aware, we had to remove a number of the single and double head on-street meters, and so some additional signage needs to go up as a result of that. We're funding that signage through the parking reserve. We have the Gallows Point dock and ramp repairs, which we discussed at the last Finance and Audit Committee meeting. We have the NAC score clock. So this project was accelerated as the clock needs to be replaced a little sooner than we were anticipating, and the Nanaimo Riptides have come forward and are helping fund this project. We have the New Horizons Senior Grant Program, which we also discussed in the last Finance and Audit Committee meeting. We had 3 new pedestrian flashers, which are being partially funded by ICBC. We have the Rotary Bowl repairs, which are being funded with a private contribution from the Nanaimo Track and Field Club, as well as a grant from the Municipal Insurance Association. And then we have the $400,000 that you recently approved from surplus for the waterfront walkway feasibility study. Now, we also have a few other project changes that you may not be aware of, so we want to bring them to your attention. Automated garbage. As you know, this year we're buying another automated truck because we will bring another route online in January 2020. There's a long lead time to those garbage trucks. We do need to purchase it this year. The tender came in for the truck. It was slightly over budget, so we had to increase the budget about $7,600. But we were also successful in securing a grant from Fortis, as it is a CNG truck. So this actually has resulted in that we will be reducing the amount of borrowing we need for the project. Photocopier replacement plan. Back in the fall, we selected a vendor for our photocopier replacement plan. At Provisional, we had our tentative plan for 2019. We knew which units we needed, but we did need to go in and do a right sizing and make sure everybody was getting exactly what they needed, a needs assessment. That has been completed. We have everything finalized for 2019. It did result in a $20,000 increase to the budget, but that's being funded from our photocopier reserve. So as I previously mentioned, departments that have photocopiers, they pay a monthly charge for those photocopiers. It goes into a reserve, and that's how we fund future replacement of that equipment. And then we had to add a project for the South Fork log boom. That's being funded from water reserves. Then we had 2 projects that we removed from the plan for 2019. We had an equipment control business for police services and Port Theatre flooring project. So as you know, since we did the original budget, we have now applied for a grant for the Port Theatre expansion. Until we find out if we are successful in the grant, it doesn't make sense to move forward with that flooring project because we want to make sure everything ties together if we start that expansion in the next year or so. And then we had a couple projects that had timing changes. So as you know, we're rebuilding Fire Station number 1. This is a multi-year project. We don't want to borrow funds before we need them. So we did touch base with the project management team, and we have updated timing of the planned expenditures for that project. And so we've adjusted the budget and the borrowing to match the planned expenditures. And we'll do that every year as the project progresses. And then we have NAC roof phase 2. So in 2018, we had phase 1 of the roof budgeted. We came across some unexpected repairs, so the project hasn't quite wrapped up. It's wrapping up this year, so it made sense to move phase 2 into 2020. We also had a couple operating changes. We had the post-employment benefits. So as Ms. Mercer talked about in her surplus report, starting in 2019, we are now going to budget in our operating budget for those post-employment benefits. We're anticipating it'll be about $700,000 and is being funded from 2019 surplus. We also added revenue from the online accommodation platform. So we're anticipating that revenue is going to be about $50,000, and as per the report to council, any revenue we bring in will be moved to the Housing Legacy Reserve. So if the revenue is more or less than the 50, whatever the actual revenue is, will all go to that Housing Legacy Reserve. Now, as we've mentioned quite a few times, we've lost some parking meters, everyone's aware of that. We have calculated what we think the impact to 2019 revenues are going to be. It's just over $112,000. So now this doesn't directly impact property taxes, but it does indirectly. So as I mentioned before, the net profits from parking go into the parking reserve, and we use that parking reserve to fund future infrastructure, both renewal and new. Currently, that infrastructure, that reserve can't fund all the infrastructure. We have a number of larger scale projects at the parquets that are significant dollars, and we're looking to the asset management reserve to help fund those projects. So when we do have a decrease in revenue, it decreases the ability to fund future projects from this reserve, which means eventually we may have to turn property taxes to fund some of those projects. That said, we do have a downtown parking strategy that's occurring this year, and I'm sure that's going to come back with some recommendations on how we can address parking. So that's kind of the highlights of the changes, particularly focusing on 2019. If council does want to make changes to the final budget, today would be the day to bring them forward. Our plan is to bring to you on April 29th, financial plan amendment bylaw, as well as the property tax bylaw, because we're targeting to have them adopted by May 6th. As Ms. Mercer said, they have to be adopted by May 15th, and we need those bylaws passed so that we can calculate and collect 2019 property taxes.
Councillor Turley.
Yes, Your Worship, through to Ms. Fuller. On page the operating budget for 2019, can you refresh my memory, where does economic development fit in?
Economic development sits under community development.
Community, thank you.
Yes.
Councillor Tucker Brown, Councillor Bonner.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I think everybody's heard a lot about permit processing time, and Mr. Lindsay, I think, in a recent meeting mentioned that there was a choke point, or a potential choke point that position could help alleviate. I'm just wondering what the impact on the budget would be if that position was added. I know it's sort of on the fly, it just came to me, and I apologize.
I can say that the position with benefits, I think we would estimate it at about $100,000 to $125,000.
Yeah.
So that'd be
100. Because approximately $1 million is 1% tax.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to staff. Following up on that, I know I keep being told, and I'm starting to learn, that you can't fund operations from surplus, but I am wondering if we could not fund this position for 4 years out of surplus and then deal with it in 4 years from now. So we would have, there would be no extra taxes to the taxpayers. It would be funded out of this year's surplus, from one of the surpluses. And then at 4 years from now, or at the end of end of this particular budget cycle, we could then relook at the position.
Once you add a QP position, it's very difficult to eliminate that position. We don't recommend funding operating costs from reserves. They should be funded from property taxes.
Good.
You're just delaying the property tax increase, because eventually we have to find a funding source for that position.
I'm just thinking that over a period of time, things change and we have different surpluses, operating surplus, that sort of thing, and it would kind of just pour into the whole thing at the end of it. That's my thinking, but I'm not an accountant by any way, shape, or form. I do have two more questions, quick ones. It's a question regarding, on page 17, you mentioned the Soroxman lighting station, lights going in,
Yes.
the outdoor lights,
Yes.
and it's over 2 years.
Yes,
Now,
correct.
I do know that in previous conversations with various people in the community, sports tourism is really important to our community as an economic driver as well. And so I'm wondering, and tourism as well. So I'm wondering if we couldn't just do that over 1 year and get going. Because if we do it over 2 years, it'll be 2 years probably before we can actually start attracting these larger sports
conventions.
Unfortunately, Mr. Harding's not here. He could better answer the question. I do know they're staging the project because there's certain pieces they're doing this year, some of the, I believe, underground work, and with the rest of the project happening next year. But Mr. Harding could address that better, why they've decided to stage it that way.
And on page 13, parking revenues, on that screen,
Yeah.
is that 13? I'm looking at the graph. And where it lists them all at 1%, there we are, parking
Yep.
revenues. So is bylaws in there at all? Bylaw revenue, revenues from bylaw?
No, bylaw revenue would likely fall under, well, some of it would fall under, it would likely fall under other revenues or fees and charges. Parking revenue is strictly the revenue from parking that offsets parking costs.
In our parking strategy plan that's coming to us later, is it the intention of the report to also include our comparisons between other cities and how much their parking revenues are part of their budgets, that sort of thing?
I'll let Mr. Sims answer that one.
I would think so, yes. The downtown stuff will be the inventory, but it will also be looking at overall costs.
And comparing to other cities and that sort of
I would
thing?
hope so.
Me too. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Hemmons and Councillor Gusbrook and Councillor Turley.
Thank you. In relation to the permit position, just kind of off the top of my head, 0.1% doesn't seem like a significant tax increase, but if we're at all interested in exploring this, I'd like to see some sort of calculation on the return of investment for, if we're unclogging permitting, are we gaining in the long run by putting in a new position? So saying I'm interested in that idea, but would need to see some more information.
Worship, there was a business case presented as part of the budget submission, business plans for that position. We could resurface that for you if you wish. In specific, you're going to shorten times by 1 week, or I doubt you're going to get that level of granularity.
Okay.
But there was a business case prepared for it, but there was a business case prepared for 24 positions. There were 13, I think, that ended up getting in. So we could, the business case does articulate why the staff felt there was a need for that.
Right, and for me, I would need to see, I think, some ROI kind of information of what do we stand to gain by putting in a new position and increasing taxes. And I know permitting in particular, we probably stand to gain quite a bit
Well, Mr.
because we're
Lindsay probably
moving
could explain how he
development.
thinks would happen with that.
So we can certainly circulate the business case, which talks a little bit, but just to give some context, there's currently 3 positions in that group which do this work, so adding 1 additional person is a significant addition to that work and the output of that work that group did.
And a follow-up, if I may, regarding, I know your department came forward with several. Was that near the top of your list? Were they in a hierarchy of any sort?
There was 2 positions that we identified for the 2019 budget. There was a MINSA position, which is now in the budget. We've hired that position and they're working. The other 2 other positions were engineering tech, what we're talking about this morning, and then an additional planner in our current funding section. So in terms of our priorities, the engineering tech is our priority right now, and it would be our number 1 priority coming forward in the 2020.
Okay.
Councillor Gusbrook.
That was kind of nice to get more information. I don't think
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in response to Councillor Bonner's concern about lighting and how quickly it must be done, I've been involved in different sports groups over the years, and organizing tournaments is usually a 2 to 3 year prior, so even if the lights aren't in there within 2 or 3 years, it's not really going to impact the ability of a new track, because most of the ones that you want to bring here, they're already allocated for other communities at this point anyway. So you look at the Royal Bank Cup, that's a good example. It was 2022. We're looking at it, so it's not immediate.
Thank Thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
Just to follow up here, on the engineering tech position, if we were to receive information and wanted to advance that to help alleviate some of the pressures on the building or the processing time, what would be the process for getting that information and amending the budget before the dates that you presented?
We would need a special finance and audit committee meeting so that you can make that recommendation so we can make the change. Because if you bring that forward at the April 29th meeting, that would be very, very late for us to add it and require additional meetings for us to update the budget and first year readings and adoption and contract.
You'd have to have a special meeting, probably recommend a special meeting. There might be other items that come up too, and it's not just one piece. If there are any other additional information that you require is concluding this piece of work, then that could be provided. Otherwise, we will be using the information from today to go forward with the submission on the 29th. So I guess what's being suggested is if you feel that you would like that, then probably should direct that we have a special meeting to deal with any this and any other items that may come up. And then it would inform the 29th submission that finance is bringing forward. That's not their staff recommendation at this time. We were just simply saying this is where we're at now and anticipating that council would move this forward to the 29th. But that's what we're here for today, is to hear if council is prepared to do that.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just for timing, if you were to have a special meeting, next Wednesday, the 17th, would be the ideal day in order to allow staff to prepare enough time prior to the 29th. So if that's the direction you choose, I would suggest the 17th.
Do I see a nodding of heads? Do I have some consensus? Speak up, someone in quiet voices.
Sure. I will speak up. It's, I know I'm not just speaking for myself. It's a whether how much is it perceptual, but we did see some statistics that showed that permits are not within the benchmark range we'd like to get to. So if I don't think it hurts us to explore the addition of that position if it's going to have a positive benefit in terms of alleviating the delay. I would be in favor, and I would move that we have a special meeting to revisit that business case next Wednesday.
Seconded, Councillor Gethlemark. Discussion on this?
Just Your Worship, right now it's a very specialized motion for that one item. And if that's the only item on the agenda, but there could be other items that if you have more discussion here, so maybe the idea is that we schedule a special meeting with that being on there, and if you have some other ideas around that, then that could also be forwarded to that meeting.
Ms. Gurry, do we really need a motion to set a meeting?
We could just, at the end of this meeting, we could work out a date, because I've actually just learned from finance, the 17th would be too late, so it would have to be the 15th or 16th. Monday or Tuesday, so we'd have to look at scheduling dates. So you don't need a motion to have a meeting. We could just, from consensus today, schedule you one. But we would like a motion at the end of this meeting to kind of know what you would like us to bring forward.
I'm going to politely ask for withdrawal of the motion as it stands, and we can send it seconder, and then we'll deal with this conclusion meeting. Councillor Gethlemark.
Oh yeah.
Thank you. Very good. Any further questions in this presentation? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. The next report is closed captioning of meetings. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this report in front of you today has been something that staff has been looking into for the last couple of years based on some feedback from the public and council, and in trying to make our meetings more accessible to all of those that like to watch them. So our IT staff took the initiative and looked into eScribe, which is the program that we use for our agendas and minutes, and came up with the option that we could, in fact, have eScribe, have closed captioning on our eScribe program. There's only one other municipality in Canada that uses eScribe that has this closed captioning option. And at the commencement of closed captioning, it's about 92% effective. It grows as it learns voices and words better. It gets up to about 98% accuracy. And the cost is per encoder. We have 2 encoders for eScribe, one at the conference center and one here. And the cost is about 11,000 something and some change for each encoder. So it's an annual cost to have this closed captioning of $22,400, and initial setup is around just under $3,000. So we're looking for council's approval to move forward with implementing eScribe if they choose.
Councillor Brown makes the recommended motion, second Councillor Bonner. Any discussion on this? Councillor Bonner.
Yes, thank you. Your worship, through the staff. I understand that this thing will work based on how well it can hear the voices as well. So in this particular room, I know that most of the voices are being picked up here at the table, but I find that staff are relatively quiet, and I'm not sure if they're being picked up as well. So is that something we could, in the event that it's not working properly, we could add microphones to the tables, possibly?
So thank you, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Bonner. There was 10,000 allocated to do some improvements to this room, and we did look at microphones at the tables. It actually was determined that it would cause worse hearing capabilities because of the ruffling of the paper, as well as the cumbersomeness of speakers and timing, etc. So what we have done is we have gone ahead and on Monday, there's some improvements being done to this room where we'll have headsets for presenters. So if you haven't noticed, unless you speak directly into that microphone, it doesn't seem to work. So the headsets will allow presenters to not be staring into the microphone and to be able to move and do their presentations as well. Yes, the councillor table you can hear pretty well. Staff do need to speak up. So I would ask that the chair and or staff remind each other to speak up so that they can be heard, because I know I'm able to be heard and I'm not the loudest person, but you do need to speak up. As well, there will be hearing devices for those people in the audience, and I believe that we'll see how well it goes, but I believe it should be okay. The closed captioning should be able to pick it up, but we won't know until we give it a try.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship, through you to staff. So do we have any stats on how many people actually watch these recordings? It seems...
Ms. Gurry?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Turley, I believe IT can get those stats. I don't know them off the top of my head. We're not, number one in the ratings, but
Somehow I knew a remark like that.
I could get those and let council know. I don't know them off the top of my head.
It just seems to me that if the number is very small, it doesn't make any sense at this point in time to try to spend this kind of money.
Councillor Hemmons.
A process piece, so if, I believe recommendation number 1 has been moved, which is that this amount, close to $25,000, will come from general taxation, so we will receive an amended financial plan with this embedded in it. Is that correct?
The budget bylaw we would bring on the 29th would include this addition,
Okay,
yes.
so we would see an increase in taxes.
Yeah, a
Okay.
small increase, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion? Contrary? Councillor Turley? You don't want to call the motion. The only opposition? Very good, thank you. Hosting Association of Anne Crown and Coastal Community Annual Convention, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this report is in front of you today to provide you with background information regarding hosting of the annual Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities Convention and receive council authorization to host this event in 2020. So there is some background information attached to the report where we would have to submit an application to host. We're already listed on their website as hosting for 2020. So going forward, if council chooses to be the host, we would ask that council commit up to $15,174 for the 2020 budget to host this event at the Vancouver Island Conference Centre. And then funding would also be allocated from general taxation.
Councillor Bonner. Moving the recommended motion, seconded Councillor Hemmons. Councillor.
Quick comment. This seems like a no-brainer considering how much it's going to cost us in hotels and all that stuff and helping people in our downtown. So.
Well, just the savings alone to us not being able to sleep in our own beds every night is invaluable to taxpayers. So, any further discussion on this? All those, Councillor Bonner.
We may not be eligible for funding from the Nanaimo Hospitality Association for this, but they have specific rules regarding conventions and conferences. So in the event that we decided to rename this something else, we probably could get funding to cover this amount. Just saying.
A lawyerly loophole, I'm quite impressed. I don't know.
Some for the future.
I'll leave it in Ms. Curry's capable hands to consider that interesting suggestion. Any further discussion on this? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. The next is consideration of permissive tax exemption applications. Ms. Mercer?
Thank you. We have 4 organizations requesting a permissive tax exemption. They are asking to be placed on the 2019 bylaw, which gives them tax exemption for the year of 2020 and onwards. All applicants have met the criteria outlined in the grant policy and guidelines. So the Nanaimo Brain Injury Society, the Nanaimo 710 Club Society, and the Nanaimo Region John Howard Society are all currently on the permissive tax exemption bylaw, but these applications are for new properties that they have acquired. The Let Me Be Me Learning Foundation is applying for the first time. So in addition to these applications, the Nanaimo Region John Howard Society has applied for a permissive tax exemption cash grant for their 2018 property taxes at 2353 Rosstown Road. And they acquired this property after the 2018 PTE intake was closed. So they will owe an estimated $3,900 on that property for 2018, and they are asking for a cash grant to cover that. And so we are here seeking the committee's recommendations on how to proceed with these applications.
Councillor Hemmons.
A question. The precedent that we're setting by giving a cash grant in lieu of the permissive tax exemption, is that something we do regularly?
I wouldn't say it's done regularly. We have done it in the past, and it's not common, but we do have a budget for it just in case they come up. So I think our budget is $7,000, I believe. So there is money in the budget to cover that. And it's on a first come, first served basis. It's not common, but it's, yeah.
And is that budget drawn down most years, or does it generally sit there?
Generally, it sits there, but some years it has been used up or partially.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
And further to Councillor Hammond's comments, having sat on the committee that used to look at these things, numbers 1 through 4 are just something we would do nationally anyway. The idea with 5 is it was for the number of years that I was on there, it was considered that the committee, it was considered that since they came to us after the taxes were due, they bought the property, they've already paid the taxes, because you have to pay the taxes when you buy the property. So the idea there was that if they're able to afford the taxes, they are, because they just paid them when they bought the property. So that's why we rarely ever gave those grants out. It was just if they were really hurting or financial reasons for that. Which, and again, is why I bring up the issue. I think these type of decisions are better made by a committee and not necessarily staff, because then you have the flexibility to be more subjective in terms of how you look at the rules and regulations. So I would probably, in that same vein, vote against number 5. So I would like to separate those out if we can when we get to that point.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. A question, perhaps I didn't hear correctly. The brain injury, that may be 710. Did I hear somebody say that they already get tax exemption and this is
So,
start?
yeah.
I may
Yep.
have missed something.
Yeah, no, 3 of the 4, so the Brain Injury Society, the 710 Club, and the John Howard Society are currently on the bylaw for other properties they own. So this is just an addition, it's an additional property that they have acquired. So they have many locations, some of them, or more than one, where the Let Me Be Me Learning Foundation, this is the first time they've applied for one.
So if I could just follow up, for example, the 710 Club, I thought they'd been in that location for a long time, so they'd be paying full taxes at that full lease rate at that location?
I would have to look at that property. I'm not 100% sure. Do you know that?
Is that the one across from the police station?
Is the address?
Mayor.
Oh, it's Prideaux, yeah.
Mr. Carson. You know you're here. Thank you.
So just with the 710 Club and the Brain Injury Society, they lease space in the Community Services Building. And if you've ever been in that building, it's sold parcels of these small little offices. And every once in a while, we add another office onto one of these tenants. So while 710's been there forever, they've taken a little space, a little extra office, and their brain injury have expanded as well to another office. So again, they've got a PT for their existing premises, and they've added one more space onto it. So that's the addition.
Okay, so that is the building property?
The Community Services
I
Building.
thought that was a city-owned.
It is a city-owned building, but as being tenants, they're responsible for property taxes. It's in their license agreements.
Any further discussion? Ms. Snellgrove?
Yes, so I recommend that council vote on 1 to 4 first, and then vote on the rest.
I was just going to say, we'll vote on 1 to 4 first. All right, all those in favor? Recommendations 1 to 4, opposed? Carried. With respect to number 5, all those in favor?
I'd like to speak to it a little bit.
Speak to it.
Yeah, I think the John Howard Society operates on a shoestring budget, providing critical services, in this community, and I don't think we really gain anything by not giving them this permissive tax exemption, and I know that would help them out a lot. So I'm definitely in favor of providing a grant.
Any, Councillor Turley?
Just on the wording for Council Hazelback, we've already voted on the progressive taxes, that this is a cash grant.
For the cash grant, right? My understanding is that they moved locations, and so it changes their eligibility for that one location this week. So, and we have the money in the budget.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of recommendation 5, contrary? Councillor Bonner, opposed? Thank you. The next item is funding request for Mid-Island Business Initiative. Mr. Lindsay.
Your Worship, I'm going to speak to this if I may.
Please.
We do have a delegation to speak as well, so I'm not sure if you want to get a delegation first and then staff can provide if you want me to introduce it.
Oh, perhaps we'll hear from the delegation first. Mr. Moss. Good morning.
Good morning, Your Worship, members of council. Thanks very much for making time for me on your agenda this morning. I appreciate it. I'm here as the chair of the Mid-Island Business Initiative, and my remarks this morning relate to our ask for bridging funds for our MTech committee. As many of you know, I've been a keen supporter of Nanaimo economic development for probably a couple of decades now, and it's something that I'm quite passionate about. My favorite definition of a successful local economy is one that employs its own children. To accomplish this, we need to maintain and grow high-value, family-supporting jobs. Not an easy thing to do. We're in a competitive environment. Whether you look around the Salish Sea, whether you look at North America, whether you look worldwide, all of those people are competing for, those communities are competing for the same jobs that we would like to attract to Nanaimo.
We need to have a focused and determined effort if we're going to get our piece of the pie. The key areas of focus that will help us achieve job retention and growth are retention of existing businesses. Our existing businesses are the key for focus of our initial energy. We need to make sure that they stay here and thrive. Supporting the growth of existing businesses, we need to do whatever we can to help them grow. Together, these first 2 points are commonly called economic gardening, and I think that's an appropriate term. Then we need to do some research and strategic thinking about what our competitive advantages are and how we can make progress in terms of job growth. And finally, we need to attract new business, because that's key as well as the competitiveness that we need to get at. Community economic development is hard work, and it's a team sport. There will never be enough resources, in my opinion, to do what we need to do, and so we'll always be scrambling for resources. And we need all parties to work cooperatively to achieve the results that we need in our community, including the city, the Chamber of Commerce, Innovation Island, tourism, Community Futures, MIBI, and others. We need many shoulders to the wheel to make progress in this world. MIBI recognizes that the recreation of community economic development structure is a work in progress. MIBI members have crafted a draft strategic plan in terms of what we think will be an appropriate way forward for community economic development. We've held 2 roundtable discussions with broader involvement. We consulted with a Senator and plan to have our recommendations around the go-forward structure to this council by mid-year. We also understand the city will be moving forward with a similar community consultation process, and we look forward to participating in that process. Hopefully the community can agree on a plan by September so that we can ramp up for 2020. Next year's coming fast. These months tick by in a big hurry. That said, there's some urgent work to be done. MIBI has limited resources raised from community businesses and organizations. Today we have focused largely on business attraction, but with a keen eye on retention and growth of current businesses. One area that we've identified as a specific concern is retention and growth of our current tech sector. To address this, MTech was created as a committee of MIBI, and it is very ably chaired by Rebecca Kirk. The specific actions to be undertaken by MTech, I'll highlight the first 4. Firstly, work to increase the tech talent pool and enable growth of the existing tech businesses, and help create an environment for those businesses.
Be a small fine, Mr. Sims.
There's some tech happening right there. Secondly, work with other partners to facilitate formal and informal meetup events to help build the local tech community on a personal level. This is commonly done in other communities, and it helps to successfully create an environment that will attract some tech workers. Thirdly, help to put Nanaimo on the map for investment capital. Growing companies need access to capital, and MTech will work to bring venture capitalists to the city and to introduce them to existing tech business principles. And fourthly, facilitate the flow of relevant information to current tech businesses and prospective startups. For those of you familiar with the success in the Okanagan, particularly in Kelowna, this is akin to the Hitchhiker's Guide for Tech and Entrepreneurship that they publish up there. So these 4 items are covered more specifically in an information piece that John Hankins sent out to each of you yesterday. So if you're looking for more detail, that's the best place to consult. So we see this work as urgent, and it has begun. Navy has agreed to support Rebecca for the month of April, so that is what she's working with now and is underway. Unfortunately, our resources are limited, which is why we asked the city for $48,000 of bridging funds to take us through the next 6 months. We'd be pleased to provide the city with regular updates in terms of what MTech encounters and what progress we make. And I should point out that MIBI's been in place since early 2017, and this is the first request that we've made of the city for funding. We would obviously very much like to have the city support for the work that we're doing, but we recognize that it's not always easy. So this is our first ask. MIBI believes that as we approach the end of the 6-month period of interim funding, there will be a more clear plan around what long-term community economic development looks like. And we'd be pleased to partake in that planning, as we mentioned. But we see that as that plan develops, the long-term provisions for these important economic guardian tasks that we're just setting out as part of MTech would be hopefully included in the long-term plan. So this is truly a short-term opportunity to mobilize existing resources and make it happen. So with that, I thank you. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Questions for the delegation? Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Mr. Wallace. You mentioned the urgency. I'm just curious, what is driving that urgency?
We are of the belief that there's some challenges in terms of attracting talent for our existing tech companies, and that some of them are considering perhaps other locations. So we think it's important to kind of get ahead of that and provide some support to those companies now.
No one else? Thank you, Mr. Moss. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Rudolph.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just going to speak on behalf of staff on this one because it's gone through quite a process of iterations of discourse and drafts of comments, and starting with a referral to our economic development officer for background information, and subsequently working its way through the process of the management team and the planning development department, which currently houses the economic function, and finally with myself, and all of us have contributed to the wordsmithing of this document. So I accept responsibility for the wording that currently sits in this report. There is no specific recommendation, but if you read the tone of the options, staff would definitely be suggesting that we pay attention to process and clarity around that type of thing. So I just want to speak to just the genesis of this just for a second. So it's our understanding that this funding request is a one-time funding ask, but it does beg the question what happens after funding. Where's the project and what is the process? So we would be suggesting that you consider this as a one-time funding ask, which is really what it is, but it does beg the question what happens after the 6 months. This is not a budgeted item, so it's not in our budget, so we would have to modify our budget in some fashion to incorporate this. We do have a slim window of opportunity to do that based on previous discussion. As council is aware, MIBI is formed out of the ashes of previous economic development functions here at the city. We don't have a specific working agreement with MIBI as a city. This is an independent agency which is regional, it's not just municipal. It involves a great deal of volunteer time by the board, and in fact, its one funded position is probably adding a great deal of volunteer time as well on top of that. So there's a tremendous amount of goodwill that's gone into this, and I think that needs to be noted. So I just think that should be said. Our process on this and our budgeted amount of money is that we're anticipating bringing forward a report within the next few weeks to council on suggesting a facilitated process to bring in many of the stakeholders that were noted in the presentation, and anybody else that's interested in having workshop or workshops around the subject matter. And there's many players in this. It's not just economic development is a broad term, and there's specific niches in that. And some of the cities has a role in it currently, and we are going to try to determine what our role going forward is. But there's the airport, there's the Hospitality Association, the Port Authority, the Chamber of Commerce, VIU, Innovation Island, tourism. There's a large set of players in this, so it's a constellation of contributing partners that contribute to the advancing the economy of this region. So it's not just about one thing, it's a broad topic. In an ideal world, we would have a working agreement with MIBI. In an ideal world, we would adhere to our process, and this would be following that, and we would have not only a process and know our niche and have a strategic plan ourselves as a municipality on this. Then we could nest this in, but we don't operate in an ideal world, and we appreciate that, and timing is a consideration. And so that's one of the conundrums that we have here is, where do we place the weight of our values in terms of the importance of process versus urgency and volunteerism. So, there is a sense of momentum with this new council and the local economy, and I think that the MIBI is sensing that and is looking to tap into that momentum as we turn the corner with our local government and the municipality. So I guess there is no right or wrong answer here. There is really how much weight you put on process and due diligence and finding our niche versus looking at this as very much a one-time opportunity, but it's also a cost. As taxpayers funded into an agency that we don't necessarily have an agreement with, but we do that in other senses. So I'd say there's pros and cons to all the options, and we've presented that best action we think we can, and it's certainly up to council to determine how it would assign its decision around that. And I guess based on the earlier discussion, there would be one more window of opportunity next week to finalize a decision on this if you wanted to do that with our special meeting now that we're having, unless it's put to bed today. So a bit of ranging comment, but those are all the factors that I think you're quite aware of.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rudolph. Councillor Bonner.
I'd like to put forward a motion that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend that Council allocate $48,000 to the Mid-Island Business Initiative for the Manufacturing Technology and Entrepreneurship Council Program for the remainder of 2019.
Second, Councillor Gusselbrock. Any discussion? Councillor Bonner, Councillor Timmins.
I'm very much in favor of this. I understand the comments by Mr. Rudolph and where we're at with this. I think that we are in a position right now where we have a vacuum of what we're doing in terms of economic development, and it's starting to show up in that we have issues here, as was just outlined by Mr. Moss earlier, where we have tech companies that are having second thoughts about our area. And so I think this is a good program to get us to the time where we will have a much stronger economic strategy for our city, and we'll be able to start putting money towards it. So I think I very much support this. I also look at the people who are behind this organization, and on some of the reports that are in, well-respected people in our community, and if they're very much behind this, I think that we should be as well. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I won't be voting in support of this motion, simply because I think we have a process in front of us that over the next few months we are going to be having a fulsome conversation with all of our partners at the table. I don't think giving ourselves 3 or 4 months to determine what we want to do collectively as a community is a tremendous risk. I think it follows what we would expect our partner organizations to do in understanding that there are many players and this is a really big thing that we're trying to do. And for me, I would like to see us have that comprehensive conversation before we start funding. That's just my preference.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Again, I seek information from Ms. Mercer. Do we have a reserve that is for council initiatives? And is there any money in it?
So there is the strategic operating reserve, but this is more of an operations kind of expense rather than a project. But you could.
And just to, I want to be mean to
I can
Councilor
take it.
Evans. Business doesn't stand still. It's an ongoing process, and it doesn't necessarily fit the schedule per se. So if there's an urgency there, one has to take that urgency seriously. And so definitely I'll be supporting the motion. If we find a way of getting it from the council initiative or where it's called, that's a good path.
As it stands currently, one of the recommendation to fund it is out of council contingency. Out of council contingency,
Okay.
which is in the budget, and it's at council's discretion to spend that.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Through the chair, I think that there is a gap in our current economic development services. I very much would look at this as a one-time stopgap measure. I think it's very important that we follow a much larger community process to establish what our economic development functions are going to be. And I think given the historical issues that we've had with a few broken relationships, we very much need to start off on a good footing where all players are at the table. And I know that there has been some resistance to this ask, and I don't want to start off on a bad foot with everybody. I think we're all aware of the different groups involved. However, it is important that we take action now and right, the process that we're looking at to establish our full XDEV function is 6 months plus away, and business is moving. And so I think if we can look at this as a one-time funding, and that's made very clear to maybe an MTEC, and then also to the other funders. And I think that we really do, I appreciate the work that the board and maybe have been doing, and I think it's a very proactive, positive, and collaborative approach. And I think that we really need to continue with that messaging, that we do business in Nanaimo by working together and by really creating a positive message about this community. And I commend the work that maybe's already done on that, and I think that this is money very well spent for the community, and I hope that we can continue on building this collaboration.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I will be voting in favor because there's a recommendation to go to council, where it can be considered at that meeting more fully as a vote. I do have a lot of concerns. One in particular is we're doing this in complete absence of strategy. So I think that it's sort of disingenuous to say that we need this because we don't actually know if we need this. There's been no environmental scan. To say there's a need in a particular sector and then to go out and do that scan, well, of course you're going to develop, you're going to get information that says, yes, there is a need in this sector, but is that the sector that we should be focusing on? I don't know. I'm not in a position to say, and I don't think anybody at this table is. With that said, I do agree with Councillor Gesselbrock. In terms of the branding work, the marketing work that maybe has done, the folks that are behind it, Ms. Dr. Director Bonner, Dr. Bonner. I do have a level of confidence in those folks and the work that they've done. again, if this was a request for maybe proper, I would have no real questions, but I do have some concerns about MTech. I will take the next bit to consider this one-time funding ask for the MTech program. But just in general, around economic development, I think these are politically charged items, but I think as a council, we need to be doing our due diligence and doing environmental stands, figuring out what is the best route for the city. The term, when we're doing economic gardening, what should our focus be? There's more than just traditional economic development. There's community-based economic development. There's lots of options that we could explore that I hope will get flushed out on the roundtable, and we just won't be looking at replicating past patterns or other municipalities programs that they come and they go. They show no real metrics of how much they fail or how much they succeed. So I hope we can really go forward with strategy rather than just our gut.
Thank you. Firstly, I want to comment that I am extremely grateful as a citizen of this community, let alone mayor, for the work that maybe is done. At a time when civic leaders, to some extent, let this community's economy down in terms of leadership around economic strategy and economic development, maybe stepped in, including a public institution like Bancroft University and many others, and I think they deserve our thanks. Having said that, I appreciate the concerns raised by Councillor Hemmons around we should have an overall strategy, but I am much more persuaded by the remarks of Councillor Turley, who, like myself, has been in business here for a long time. Business doesn't wait, and it's a terrible analogy, and forgive me, but to me this is akin somewhat to someone who's waiting for a major operation, but in the meantime requires some medicine to make sure that the patient survives until such time as you can have the major operation. This is an interim measure, this is a stopgap measure. This is also, very importantly, and I can't emphasize this enough, a signal to the business community who we respect and are grateful for what they've done so far on their own, but we are prepared to take up our appropriate role as the civic leadership of this community in due course with an appropriate strategy, a plan, whether it's an in-house or an out-of-house, whether it's an economic development corporation, whatever it may be. In the meantime, Ms. Manhas at City Hall continues to carry on her important work, but I think for the sake of the amount of money involved, for the importance it sends in terms of a signal, and for the even modest risk that we lose some existing business along the way because there is such incredible competition for business attraction and retention. I think it's well worth that, so I'm going to vote in favor of the motion this morning. So, any further discussion? Motion. All those in favor? Contrary? Councillor Hemmons? Carried. Thank you very much. I appreciate the challenges it places in front of us, but let us move forward. So, any other business? I think this would be the time to talk about our next meeting. Ms. Gurry, is that the appropriate place?
Yeah, I'll actually just invite Ms. Nelgrove. She's
sorry,
the
Ms.
clerk
Nelgrove,
today.
yes.
Sorry, I was doing her job. I was doing her job earlier.
Yes, so if council, if the finance and audit committee wish to have that meeting, we would need a motion saying to discuss the implications of the permanent central position being added.
And any other matters that may be added to the agenda, is that fair to say? Okay. Can I have that motion? Councillor Bonner? Seconder? Councillor Brown? Are we all clear on what we're doing?
If we have a date, sorry, I missed it.
I heard it was the 15th.
We're gonna work. Can we get back to you?
Oh, okay, yeah.
And make sure council's available as well.
We'll work with the finance department to find a date that works for the council.
All right. Very good. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. Question period. I suspect we probably don't have any questions. I don't think there's any further items. Motion for adjournment. Councillor Brown, second Councillor Bonner. All those in favor? Motion carried. Thank you very much, everyone.
On the subject. That's a consideration.
You gotta do this.
So it just needs to be updated then.